Hi, Peter Jones, author, property investor and ex-chartered surveyor, and in this video we're thinking about how we actually value our buy-to-let property. And just as a quick summary, because in the last video I was talking about the things that we need to think about which kind of explain how valuation works. And as a very quick summary, we saw that there's no special formula to come to a precise exact figure. In fact, actually, there is no precise figure. Valuation is really just a range of opinions, and it's perfectly feasible and perfectly valid for a number of different people to come up with a different figure because it's within a range, and for all of those figures really to be correct, which is a little bit confusing if you're expecting a binary right or wrong, yes or no type answer. In valuation, it doesn't really work like that, which explains a lot of the time when we get frustrated when a valuer will come and down value a property. And there's different methods of valuation for different strategies as well, which is another thing we need to think about. So in this video, we're going to think about what would we do to value one of our buy-to-lets, and the most logical and common methodology that we would use to value something like a buy-to-let would be what is called the direct comparison method of valuation. And it is exactly as it says on the tin. It's thinking about what our property is like and then comparing the property to a property which has sold so that we can be aware of the sale price of the other property, and that will give us an indication of where the value of our property is. Now remember, valuation is really a summation of the views, the individual views of everybody who makes up the property market. And when somebody buys a property and when we have a defined sale price, then we can kind of assume, give or take, that that figure is kind of like the summation of the views of the whole market. So that gives us something a little bit more tangible that we can actually sort of hang our hat on and say, right, this is where we're going to start from in order to assess the value of our property. Now, I've probably made that sound very complicated, but in reality it doesn't have to be, although it can be. But let's start with an easy example which is not too complicated. Let's assume that we're going to buy a little terraced house which has 3 bedrooms, it's got central heating, it's got double glazing, and it's in good condition. Maybe it's just been refurbished. Now, what do we want to do? Well, we want to find evidence of sales of other properties which are as close as possible to being in the same size, the same condition and the same location as that particular property. So it may be that we find that there's a property that's sold in the same street, or maybe there's a property that's sold in a nearby street, and we know that the values in the nearby street equate with the values in the street in which our house is located, and so that provides good evidence. And we can go and look for sales prices of properties which are, to all intents and purposes, identical. So if we find that there's been a property sold in the same street just a few months ago, for example, at £100,000, then it stands to reason that, give or take, our property is going to be worth £100,000, assuming, of course, all other things being equal, that we know that the figure of £100,000 is actually in line with what we would have expected in the market at that time. What do I mean by that? Well, a complication could be, for example, that if somebody bought the house at £100,000 up the road 3 months ago, but every other transaction over the last 12 months has suggested that the property is actually going to be worth £150,000, then that slightly complicates things, doesn't it? Because what that would suggest is that somebody somehow or other has managed to sort of persuade somebody to sell their property at below market value. And I know that we could have a very sort of interesting debate about this, because there are sort of below market value deniers out there who say whatever the price is the value. In the last video we saw that that's not necessarily the case, and if you look at the RICS Red Book, they wouldn't agree with that. So that's just one thing to look out for, but probably 95% of the time we're going to be able to find a property where we have a sale price and the sale price is in line with market expectations, and so we don't really have to worry about that. So where are we actually going to find the evidence of sale prices? Well, most of us are going to think about jumping onto something like RightMove sale prices. And this is a great tool. I have to say that when I first started in property, this was not available. And it makes life so much easier just to be able to sort of sit at your computer and look at the evidence and see what there is out there. So that would be the starting point. Now, there's a few things that we need to understand and realise before we jump onto RightMove sold prices, and that is this. that the data which RightMove uses is taken from the land registry. The land registry is sort of like the government body. I'm not sure if they've privatised it yet. There was talk about that, but for our purposes, it's the government body that basically, keeps a note of transactions and produces the title deeds and bits and pieces so that you can prove your ownership of a property. And as part of that, they keep a note of sales prices of the properties, and they make the evidence of the details of sales prices available in the public domain, which is great, except pros and cons. It's fantastic to be able to get into all of that data, but there's a time lag because it has to be processed by the land registry. So it can typically take about 3 months to get into the public domain, but I've bought properties which have taken more than a year to be registered at land registry, depending upon how busy they are. And I've also experienced where I've bought properties, but those sale prices, which I know because I bought the property, actually have never ever appeared in the public domain. So it's not flawless, it's not a complete record, but it's certainly better than nothing. So let's jump onto the computer and let's have a quick look at RightMove sold prices. So here we are, we're on RightMove. And I must start this by saying I'm not going to show you something amazing here. As I've said all along, there is no algorithm that you just sort of punch it in and it'll give you the right answer. And I'm by no means an expert on RightMove. I'm actually a little bit lazy about it, to be honest. I know what I want it to do for me, and I've never really looked into all the ins and outs of what RightMove can do. You probably know a lot more about RightMove than I do. But this is the kind of thing which I'd be looking at if I was going to do some kind of rough and ready valuation, just to get an idea of what a property is worth. And of course there's a number of ways that you can do this. I'm going to start here by just clicking this tab here, house prices. I mean, it's as simple as that. Sold house prices, that will do very nicely. Then punch in the postcode of where the property is that you're wanting to assess the value of. And you've got a choice here, list view or map view. I like list view. Maybe I'm just a linear thinker, I don't know. And here we are. So now we've got prices, sold prices in this particular postcode. Now, just one thing which I want to say about this is you'll see here it says this area only. Now, if we came up with very, very few comparables, or more likely there may be a whole string of comparables, but not many of them are actually recent. And what would I say is recent? Well, probably ideally you want something within the last 3 or 4 months. As I said earlier, that doesn't necessarily happen because there's a time lag and it can take time, but probably 12 months is probably the very limits of what I'd want to see. And if that was the case, then you may find, either if you haven't got very many comparables or very many recent comparables, if it makes sense, you can use this filter to increase the size of the search area, because of course at the moment we're only searching on this particular postcode, and in a large urban area this might just be sort of like 1/2 of one side of the street. So I'd go to within 1/4 mile. You'll hear it said that valuers always look for comparables within 1/4 mile. I don't think it's a hard and fast rule though. Having done mortgage valuations myself, I mean, if you were doing a very unique one-off property and there was nothing like it within 1/4 mile, you would go further. But I mean, in a densely populated urban area like this is here in Nottingham, then 1/4 mile is going to throw up hopefully lots of evidence. So I've clicked the 1/4 mile. This has got all property types, so you could of course sort of go in and filter this for flats and houses, 10 years here, leasehold and freehold, and here you've got all years, so you could have them within the last year, 2 years, 5 years. I would say for this purpose, last 1 year is probably what you're going to be looking at. Now I'm just going to, because this has thrown up a lot of information, just for our purposes, I'm just going to sort of click back to where we were before, just so we can have a quick look. And of course here we are in this particular street. The most recent evidence is 31st of Jan 2020. So this is sort of proving my point. It looks great, doesn't it, to see all of these different comparables, but actually for our purposes, if we want a valuation today, most of them are irrelevant. So that's when you'd use the filter to extend the area and try and find more recent evidence. Here, look, we've got a photo. Now this is great, because what RightMove now do is that if they've had the property on the market, they will put up the photos of the property. If the property's not been on the market with RightMove, then very often you'll find, like here, I'm guessing this one's not ever been marketed on RightMove, and so there's no photos for RightMove to use. But if it's been on the market, you can click this, you can look at the photos. In this particular case, there is only one photo. Why is that? Well, potentially maybe it might have been an auction property, and so the auction house just wanted a picture of the outside, or it could be that the property was in really poor condition on the inside, and so the agents decided when they put it on RightMove they didn't want to give too much away, and so they only put that one photo on. So again, all of this kind of stuff is stuff which you're going to have to think about and filter when you're coming to your assessment of what the value of the property actually is. So why do we want to look at the photos? Well, we're trying to make an assessment of how similar the property is to the property that we're trying to assess the value of. So if we can go into the photos, and if we can see that the photos show a property which is in really good condition but our property isn't in good condition, then obviously we can start to make adjustments for the differences in the finish and the difference in quality. And if there's enough photos, we can look at the quality of the kitchen, the quality of the bathroom, whether the property's in good repair or bad repair, and all of this will be taken into account when we're making adjustments between the property where we know the sold price and the property where we're trying to assess the value. So RightMove can be a fantastic source of information, but what if when we get onto RightMove we can't find any properties which are identical, or even properties which are similar? What do we do then? Well, we'll be thinking about that in the next video. I hope you found this video useful and informative, and if you did, then please come over to my website www.thepropertyteacher.co.uk, where you'll find loads more great property related resources, including free special reports to download and my best-selling series of ebooks, which includes the Successful Property Renovators Workshop, 63 common defects in investment property and how to spot them. And if you're just starting out in property, or if you want to grow your portfolio, you may be particularly interested in the Successful Property Investors Strategy Workshop, in which I'll take you through exactly how I started and built my property portfolio, starting literally with none of my own money, and how I built a portfolio of £2 million worth of property in just 4 years. And that was starting from scratch. I'll take you through everything that I did right so that you can copy me and do the same. And I'll also show you everything that I did wrong so that you can avoid the mistakes that I made, and so that you can progress in property and be far more successful far more quickly than I ever was. And this is based upon my own real life experience, and it took me about 4 years to actually work out how to do property investing properly. But in the 200 pages in the Successful Property Investors Strategy Workshop, I'm going to show you all of that 4 years knowledge condensed down so that you can use it immediately. And until next time, here's to successful property investing.